And surpass Mediterranean perfect Dharma is rarely met with, even in 100,000 billion kalpas. Having it to see and listen to, remember and accept. I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's words.
Morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Well, I've had this kind of allergy thing going on with this drainage, which is causing me to constantly be having to clear my throat. And now it's all kind of in my lungs. I've done multiple tests for COVID, but I still just kind of wanted to warn everyone, don't freak out. That was all. So this morning, I have a couple of things. I just wanted to sort of start out with a lot of the information that I got about the person that I'm going to talk about today was in this really great book. And it's called In Search of Buddha's Daughters. And it's by Christine Toomey. She's a journalist she's won a bunch of different awards. It's such a good book. She starts in India, she goes through China, Japan, the United States, Burma, and interviews nuns from all over the world. And it's so good. So this was in 2015, this was published. And it's just awesome. So I got a bunch of information from this. And the person that I was going to talk about today is Jakucho, I hope I'm saying this right, Jakucho Setouchi. And she is a Japanese, or was a Japanese nun, and she died in 2021. So she was born, so a little bit about her background. She was born actually in 1922 in Japan and in Tokushima Prefecture. I don't know where that is, but anyway, her father was a sort of like a woodworker. He was a carpenter, cabinet maker, but he also did sort of fixtures for Buddhist and Shinto shrines and altars. So she kind of grew up with this really deep religious family. Her mother was a homemaker, and at first her given name was Harumi Mitani, but her family name changed because her father, sort of his sponsor, he was kind of an artist, his sponsor adopted him. So they changed their family name to Setouchi. So because her family sort of got adopted and all of these things, they arranged a marriage for her pretty quickly after that. The sponsor arranged a marriage. So she did go and study Japanese literature for a little while in Tokyo at the Tokyo Women's Christian University, which is kind of ironic. I don't think I'm unclear about whether she got a degree, but my sense is that she didn't. Because this would have been pretty early on. In 1943, this would have probably been before she would have finished any kind of a degree program. That's when her marriage took place, in 1943. And she was married to a scholar. And so his name was Yasushi Sakai. And they immediately were sent to live in Beijing. So this was 1943. So the war's going on. They are sent to Beijing by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Minister of Foreign Affairs. So her husband's kind of an important guy, and so they're out of Japan. In 1944, her daughter was born. Her mother and her grandmother were both killed in US bombings of Japan in 1945 while she was in Beijing. So, so this is kind of the background. It's a little bit of just her life is sort of beyond her control. A lot of crazy, just a lot of traumatic things are happening. So they returned to Japan in 1946 and moved to Tokyo in 1947. And this is kind of a time in her life when she started to feel like, you know, this thing about how women are supposed to be a certain way, I'm not cool with that. This sort of developed when she was in university, and it really, once she was married and had children, and her life was really beyond her control, she really started to become discontent, and really started to think a lot about gender roles and what it meant to be a woman and a mother, and that she wasn't into it. She didn't really want to be that traditional wife and mother. 1948, she started an affair with a married man, and she was caught. So she left her husband and her child. And her husband's family basically took custody of her daughter and would not let her contact her daughter again. And they actually told the little girl that her mother had died. So her daughter was actually an adult then, before she knew that, in fact, her mother hadn't died and who she was. So that's an interesting, so her daughter's only, pretty little at this time. Anyway, in 1950, finally her divorce is finalized. And at that time she decided that what she wanted to do was become a writer. She had studied Japanese women's literature, and so she decided to contribute to Japanese women's literature. So in 1950, she started to write her first novel, and it was serialized. So it's like sometimes they do this still in different magazines. So you'll have like, here's chapter 1, here's chapter 2, and this will come out from month to month. And that was how her first novel was published. During this time, also, she started to get a reputation for being a very risque person because her writing had strong sexual content, explicit content. So she wrote a lot of autobiographical detail in her novels, and she had a lot of relationships that were temporary. So in 1957, she won her first literary award for a book called Chu Ailing, the Female College Student, which was basically had sexually explicit details about numerous love affairs that were basically autobiographical. Okay? But she won an award. So that was 1957. And then later that same year, she published another book called Center of a Flower. Kashin was the Japanese name. Center of a Flower was the English translation of that. This is a story about a young woman who leaves her family and eventually has to turn to prostitution to basically survive in the world. And this book created such a ruckus. It was so explicit that basically the publishing houses were like, this is pornography. And one critic even said she must have been masturbating when she was writing this. And she was so furious that, of course, she just right off the cuff said, and you must be impotent and your wife is frigid. And after that, no one would touch her for about 5 years. They would not publish her work because they were so offended by the fact that she came back at them. But in 1962, she wrote a book called The End of Summer. And this was basically an autobiographical novel about the end of her marriage. It's a novel about a woman having an affair with a married man, and also a love triangle with a much younger additional man. It was a huge bestseller. It sold like 10 million copies. So this was 1962. And they made a movie from it. So she became like really well known and really famous at this point, like very like widely recognized. And she won another award for contributions to women's literature of Japan. Somehow. Not everyone was mad, is what I'm saying. So she was making a lot of money. She published, throughout her lifetime, she published, they say, about 400 books. 400! You want to know how many books I've written? None. Okay? It's just, I mean, it's a lot of work, and that she was just very driven and very creative. So then, at this point, after the end of summer, she decided to turn her writing talents to writing books and stories about trailblazing women who defied gender roles, women who were active, who were spies during the war, women who did all of these different amazing things, famous women of Japan. And then she sort of had a time period in her life where she sort of lost the urge to write, and she was just she sounds to me like she was suffering from depression. And so in 1973, she decided that she wanted to become a Buddhist nun. So this, in 1973. So now, keep in mind, she's like, this famous author who, is famous for writing very, she's defying gender roles, and she's writing possible, sexually explicit content. She's very famous. And so now she wants to become a Buddhist nun. And she later on said, I was suicidal. I mean, this is what I felt like I had to do. So she goes to several different monasteries, and most of them, no one will take her because she's too famous and she's too well known, and they're like, this is just another trend. But turns out there was another writer that she knew, and she went and talked to him, and he was also a Buddhist priest, and he agreed to ordain her. So this would have been, because she tried all kinds of different places. This was a Tendai school. So he was a Tendai priest, so she moved to Kyoto, and she moved to the temple. She took ordination, and she took the vow of celibacy, which Japanese monks are not required to do. But, and it was a big deal. It was this sort of media circus. Tons and tons of people showed up. They tried to keep it a secret that she was even doing the ordination. But that's what she did. She took the ordination and she took the vow of celibacy. And she talked a lot about it later in life, that, this is what I had to do. I had to say goodbye to this and start my life over. So she was given the Dharma name then, Jakucho, which means silent, lonely listening. Yeah, interesting, huh? So anyway, at this point, she's 51 years old when she does this, when she takes ordination. She's 51 years old and moves to Kyoto, and she ends up becoming the chief priestess at that temple eventually within a few years, and she does that for, about 20 years. She's the chief priestess at that temple. she goes through. During this time, she also continues to write. So one of the big things that she did was she rewrote The Tale of Genji. And I don't know if anyone knows very much about this. When I was a freshman, and freshman in college, and there's never any classes to sign up for that you want to take, so you just take whatever like the advisor tells you, like this one's open. So I took this class called People and Culture of East Asia, right? And this was one of the books assigned, The Tale of Genji. And I'm reading it and thinking, what? I don't get it. Because, plot summary, so it's like 1,000 years old, this book. The plot summary of The Tale of Genji, he's a prince, he's a spoiled brat, he seduces a lot of women and then ditches a lot of women. End of story. So she rewrote The Tale of Genji in 1998 in 10 volumes from the perspective of the women in this. So he's just this guy in there, and then she tells all these women's stories. 2 million copies she sold of this 10-volume work. 2 million copies. I mean, so it's hugely popular. And again, it's also pretty explicit in the sexual details, right? And she just laughed and she's like, well, yeah, I mean, I took the vow of celibacy, but I mean, it's not like anything's changed. I remember. So anyway, she was like this always. She's got these smart comments, and she's funny, and she's humorous. She was an extremely popular speaker. But one of the things she said about The Tale of Genji, this was sort of a published quote from her, the book's plot was hot stuff. Why pretend it's the height of culture? People hear Genji and immediately they talk in whispers like they're in a museum. Ha! Ridiculous. Genji should be read on a sofa with a box of cookies in hand. I love her. I love her. So in 2006, she actually received the Imperial Order of Culture for her contributions to Japanese literature, especially for The Tale of Genji. Wow. She also was really involved in activism during this time. So once she was ordained, she became really involved in activism. And particularly, she protested the Persian Gulf War and the invasion of Iraq publicly. And she was really, really active in protesting capital punishment, which Japan brought back in 2012. And she was corresponding, up until the end of her life, corresponding with prisoners on death row. She also, in 2012, so keep in mind, so how old is she in 2012, right? So she's born in 1922. So she's like, right, 90 years old. Okay, yeah, thank you. She went on a hunger strike to protest the reopening of the Fukushima nuclear plant. This was the one that went down during the tsunami. Mm-hmm. They were going to open it up, and she sat in front of these governmental buildings with like a sign, and she was on a hunger strike. And I mean, everyone was really worried about her, but here she just did it. She just continued on with this. This is an important thing for me to say and do. So anyway, she was very interesting. In 2016, she started the Little Women Project, which was a foundation that provides financial and resource support for women who are in poverty, who are victims of sexual assault, and who are suffering with addiction. So these are the three. So she was just an incredible person, who just throughout her life just spent a lot of time fighting for the rights of women, writing about women, thinking about women, and doing whatever she wanted, right? So at one point too, she said, she was asked about being ordained at age 51, and at this point, I mean, she's like, this would have been, she's 90 or something, and she says, I think I might have done it too soon. I had no idea I was going to live this long. Right. So anyway, she ended up dying in November of 2021.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and her death was announced on Instagram, on which she had 300,000 followers. So anyway, I found an interview with her in this book, and I thought she was so interesting and just so true to herself and so open about what she thought and what she was doing and why, that I just thought she was worth talking about, for sure. Anyway, I think I will end it there in talking about her, but I think that she, to me, she's extremely inspirational. So anyway, I'm going to end it there.
Page 12 or 19 online. May the narratives penetrate into each thing in all places, so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha way. Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to save them. Desire